Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is information@cuandreview.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday, the 28th of January 2026, from the opinion section. Reform is slipping in the polls. Tory defections won't help. This article is by Gregor Gall. Reform UK's rise is no longer unstoppable, with fresh polling across the UK's parliaments showing the party stalling as Tory support edges up, tactical voting grows, and internal missteps begin to bite, says Gregor Gall. For most commentators and observers, the story of Reform UK has been one of witnessing an insurgent and intensifying star, fronted by Nigel Farage, and especially with a spate of recent high-profile defections from the Tories like Nadim Zahawi and Robert Jenrick. It seems agreed by all that Reform's star just keeps rising and rising. But stars cannot only wax, they can also wane. So, with the aid of a little scratching beneath the surface, it seems that Farage and his merry band of men and women have actually started to experience their first floundering. Such stalling and stumbling are not to suggest that Farage and Reform are now set on a decreasing downward path. They are not yet quite staggering. Rather, the stalling and stumbling show Farage and Reform have some palpable problems which are registering with the electorate. For the Westminster Parliament from March 24 until November 24, Reform's average popularity rose from 10% to 20% in the polls. After that, it rose to a high of 31% to 32% in October 2025. This rise was continuous, but then it fell back for the first time since the 24 election to 27 to 28%. For the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, and even with far fewer polls having been conducted, the same trend is observable. In April 2024, Reform broke through the 10% barrier and rose thereafter continually to 28% in October 2025, before falling back by a point. In Scotland, for the Parliament at Holyrood, Reform's rise started slightly later and has not hit the same heights. For the constituency seats, Reform broke the 10% barrier in October 24, rising to 20% by the end of 25. For the list seats, the same was true, but 19% was the high. Individual rather than average or aggregated polling adds some detail to the situation in Scotland. For the constituency seats in the second half of 25, Reform's polling strength was second only to the SNP in 2/3 of the polls conducted. But this dipped in the first poll of 2026, with Labour making a comeback. Given that the chances of Reform winning any constituency seats are slim, for the crucial list seats, the same trajectory is true with reform's support back to where it was in mid-25. And tellingly, in the latest poll, the number of voters prepared to vote for a party they do not support to keep reform out was high. Some 76% of SNP voters were prepared to vote Labour to keep out reform, while 57% of Labour voters were prepared to vote SNP to do likewise. This overall trend for reform for the three parliaments is not because Labour's polling has revived. Indeed, it continues to fall. For Westminster, since the general election in 2024, it has fallen from an average of 35% to 18% today, almost a 50% drop. Give or take a few percentage points, the same trend is apparent for both the Senate and Holyrood. As we now know, the situation for Labour in Wales is much worse, with it now polling around 12%. Rather, one of the primary reasons for reform stalling and stumbling is the rise of the Tories. You would not think that from the glancing at the front pages of the newspapers, but it seems that Kemi Badenoch is no longer the car crash that she once was. For Westminster, since the summer of 24, the Conservatives have risen, fallen, and risen again. Even though at 20%, they are still behind the high of 25% that they had. They are now ahead of Labour, and they have been running second to reform in most polls since November 2025. Badenoch has bedded in, and the Tories even talk of a Badenoch bounce. Having used up her one-year free pass on not being challenged for the party leadership, she now looks much stronger. She got plaudits for sacking Jenrick before he defected. And yet the situation in Scotland and Wales are still different, with the Tories still on their downward path for these two nations' parliaments. In average polling, the Tories have fallen from 15% to 10% in Scotland and 20% to 10% in Wales. Meanwhile, reform is not looking so shiny and new as it once did. One of its main problems is that it is becoming a dustbin for despised and disgruntled Tories. Reform clearly wants to take up the mantle of what it sees as true blue Toryism. So it wants to be both the same as, but also different from, the Tories. By becoming a refuge for current and former Tory MPs, it is in danger of looking far more the same than different. In other words, Tories 2.0. This is only the most recent and visible problem reform has. Underneath this lies the chaos of office holding in councils in England, the flip-flopping over policy, and the impact of immigration having fallen. In councils like Kent and Durham County, there has been continued chaos, and some 6% of Reform councillors elected in May 2025 have resigned, been expelled, or been suspended. This is not a great advertisement. On taxation and public expenditure, Farage has looked inept, incompetent, and out of his depth after promising £90 billion of tax cuts, but then backtracking on this pledge once he was challenged about how this would be paid for. Claiming that former Tory Chancellor of the Exchequer Nadeem Zahawi, who was sacked as Tory party chairman after an ethics inquiry found he had failed to disclose that HMRC was investigating his taxes, will be able to help here makes reform look even less credible. Since the summer of protests against asylum seekers being housed in hotels in England and Scotland, immigration does not quite seem to be as burning an issue. One plus point for reform is that the allegations that Farage used racist language while at the Dulwich College private school between 1975 and 1982 have not made much of an impact. While the kinds of voters supporting reform might not endorse racism, they're not likely to be entirely put off reform either. Those who find racism abhorrent are unlikely to have ever thought of voting for reform in the first place. That article was by Gregor Gall, who is a research associate at the University of Glasgow. This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday, the 28th of January 2026, from the business section. Palestine protesters shut down Leonardo factory in Edinburgh. This article is by Gabriel Mackay. Activists have blockaded an arms factory in Edinburgh as they call for the company to end its contract to produce components for fighter jets. More than 100 people blocked the entrance to the Leonardo factory at Crewe Toll early on Wednesday morning, expressing solidarity for Palestine and opposition of the sale of parts to Israel. The plant in the capital has been targeted due to its components being used on the F-35 fighter jet, as well as the Apache attack helicopter. The company produces laser targeting systems for Lockheed Martin, which sells the jets to Israel. The UK government has refused to suspend the sale of components for the F-35, despite there being a clear risk of them being used in breaches of international humanitarian law. The UK is part of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter programme, which makes the jets, along with the US, Italy, the Netherlands, Canada, Australia, and Norway. Israel is not a member of the program, but it is a customer, meaning it buys fighter jets from the program. The UK government argued that it could not suspend licenses for the F-35 components because doing so would undermine the program as a whole. Asleem, a 29-year-old health charity worker who took part in the blockade, said, "Officially, there has been a ceasefire, but the indiscriminate killing and maiming has not ceased. Meanwhile, Leonardo UK receives subsidies from the Scottish government despite its complicity in the occupation of Palestine." Andy, a 30-year-old nurse, said, "We want to encourage workers of Leonardo to take action within their trade union to end this F-35 contract with Lockheed Martin and amplify the voices of Palestine Action prisoners who have been on hunger strike in British prisons." A Leonardo spokesperson said, "Leonardo UK is subject to UK government export controls and does not supply equipment direct to Israel. The safety and well-being of our employees, contractors and neighbours is our first priority. Aggression towards or the intimidation of our people who work hard to support the security and defence of the UK is not acceptable." Police Scotland have been contacted for comment. That article was by Gabriel Mackay.
From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 29th of January 2026. From the news section, a breaking news story. Former Deputy First Minister Jim Wallace dies aged 71. Report by Craig Williams. Former Scottish Deputy First Minister Jim Wallace has died after suffering complications as a result of surgery, his family have said. Lord Wallace, who served as Holyrood's first ever Deputy First Minister, was undergoing a procedure at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh on Thursday, but died as a result of complications from what was a scheduled major operation. His wife Rosie Wallace said, "The family are all very shocked by Jim's death. It was all so sudden. he was still incredibly active in a whole host of areas. Wallace was a driving force behind devolution and, in becoming Deputy First Minister of Scotland, was the first Liberal since Lloyd George to serve in government. A native of Annan in Dumfriesshire, he became an adopted Orcadian when, as a young advocate, he succeeded Joe Grimmond as Liberal MP for Orkney and Shetland in 1983, rising to become an employment spokesman and Liberal Democrat chief whip during 18 years at Westminster. But it was his commitment to Home Rule that saw him make his real mark. He became Scottish Liberal Democrat leader in 1992 and immersed himself in the work of the Scottish Constitutional Convention. He worked there with the then General Secretary of the Labour Party in Scotland, Jack McConnell, and brokered the deal by which the Scottish Parliament would be elected by proportional representation. After the 1979 referendum campaign, he stood as Lib Dem candidate for Orkney, having also secured the deal whereby Shetland would receive a separate MSP. Mr Wallace led the Lib Dems into coalition talks with Labour after the 1999 Holyrood election, becoming Deputy First Minister under Donald Dewar, Henry McLeish and then Mr McConnell, deputising as First Minister during each change of office. He served as Justice Minister and then Enterprise Minister. Under his leadership, he took the Liberal Democrats to their highest ever share of the vote in Scotland, maintaining 17 seats in the first and second terms of Holyrood. In May of 2021, Wallace was installed as the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, becoming the second elder in modern times to take up the 12-month role. Written by Craig Williams, read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 29th of January 2026, from the news section. 4 men to stand trial charged with killing man inside HMP Addiewell by Grant McCabe. 4 suspects are to stand trial charged with killing a man in prison. Cadil Hussein, 34, Dylan Rigby, 24, Craig Monroe, 39, and Kyle Byrne, 34, are accused of attacking Lewis Spence at HMP Addiewell in West Lothian on December the 17th, 2024. It is claimed the 28-year-old was repeatedly struck on the body with what is described as a sharp implement. Prosecutors allege Spence was also pursued, causing him to jump from a balcony. The indictment states he fell to the floor and was left so severely hurt he passed away the next day at Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. The case called for a short hearing at the High Court in Glasgow today. The 4 deny a charge of culpable homicide. Defence lawyers Tony Lenihan KC, Tony Graham KC, John Scully and KC and Richard Souter, along with prosecutor Margaret Barron, agreed a trial could be fixed. Lord Matthews set a date and the case is scheduled to begin in April 2027. The trial could last up to 8 days. That report was written by Grant McCabe and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 29th of January 2026. From the news section. Scottish Archaeology Team shortlisted for Bronze Age Hoard Award. Report by Jodie Harrison. Work uncovering the secrets of 2 ancient hoards has seen a Scottish archaeology group named in the running for a top award. Guard Archaeology has been nominated for Current Archaeology's Research Project of the Year Award 2026 for work it carried out bringing 2 Scottish Bronze Age hoards to light. The group, which is the only Scottish organisation to be named on the shortlist for the prestigious prize, led the post-excavation analyses of both the Carnoustie and Rosemarkie hoards. The Carnoustie hoard, found in Aberdeenshire, was made up of a bronze sword in a scabbard, wrapped in a woven wool garment which was fastened by a pin. Alongside this was a bronze spearhead, its plate wrapped in sheepskin, and its socket wrapped in a fine woolen cloth. The spearhead was decorated with a gold collar around its socket, though its wooden shaft was not present. Both items were dated to around 1120 to 920 BC. The Rosemarkie artefacts were uncovered at a building site in the small village in the Murray Firth. 9 neatly packed items, including 6 bracelets, were unearthed along with evidence of several Bronze Age houses. Despite being uncovered several years ago, in 2016 and 2020 respectively, work to fully examine the relics was only completed last year. Guard staff were joined by experts drawn from across Britain, including National Museum of Scotland, the Universities of Glasgow, Stirling, Bradford and Exeter, and various independent specialists on the projects unravelling the history of both hoards. Based in Glasgow and Edinburgh, Guard Archaeology is one of Scotland's leading archaeology companies, having been set up in 2011 to replace the Glasgow University Archaeological Research Division. Both hoards were buried close to other Bronze Age settlements, leading the Guard archaeologists to come up with theories on why they were hidden in the first place. Both were unusual, as they appeared to have been buried for safekeeping rather than as grave goods or votive offerings. Guard post-excavation supervisor Rachel Buckley said, "Unlike metalworkers' stashes of damaged objects that could be recycled, our votive hoards have deliberately broken at objects thrown into rivers, lochs and bogs with no chance of recovery. The Rosemarkie and Carnoustie boars contained treasure items that were collected together, wrapped and neatly buried for safekeeping, close to a settlement where they could be guarded and easily retrieved when the time came. The question, then, is not so much why they were buried, but why the time never came for these Bronze Age communities to retrieve their valuable belongings." The metallurgical analyses of both hoards revealed surprisingly extensive networks with southern Britain, Ireland and even the continent. It appears that late Bronze Age metalworkers in Scotland ranged far and wide to source the materials they shaped into precious objects thousands of years ago. Ms. Buckley added, "Through careful minute analysis of every strand of evidence, the organic remains as well as the metals, we learned an enormous amount about the people who buried these hoards at the tail end of the Bronze Age. The post-excavation analyses of finds recovered from Carnoustie and Rosemarkie revealed exceptional archaeology." That report was written by Jodie Harrison. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 29th of January 2026, from the news section. West Lothian woman gives birth by maternal assisted caesarean, by Nick Forbes. A West Lothian woman has described how she was left sobbing with joy after giving birth to her daughter by maternal assisted caesarean, thought to be the first time the procedure has been used in Scotland. Lila El Alti, 39, who's originally from Lebanon, said she requested the innovative procedure for her third child after being left traumatised by the experience of giving birth to her first 2 children. The novel process involves the mother donning scrubs and effectively becoming part of the operating theatre team carrying out the C-section. It was carried out last year at University Hospital Wishaw in North Lanarkshire, which is part of the NHS Lanarkshire Health Board. Speaking at a meeting of the board on Thursday, Ms. Elati described the moment she pulled her daughter from her womb and onto her chest as the most magical experience of my life. I'd recommend it to any woman who feels they would benefit from having such an active and empowering role in giving birth by C-section, she said. I felt euphoric for weeks after Aurora was born in March, and my joy was not just for myself. My having done this successfully has hopefully opened the door for other women to have this wonderful experience as a valid birth option. Ms. El Alti, a lecturer at Edinburgh Napier University, explained that she had given birth to her first child, a girl, while living in Sweden, where she said she was coerced to have a very traumatic induction. She went on, "When that didn't work, the clinicians relented, and I had a caesarean, but what happened before and after it was horrendous. There was no proper attempt to explain what they were doing to my body, or to genuinely get my consent for anything, including intimate examinations and very painful procedures." She said the experience had left her with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and that she waited 5 years before having her next child, a boy, by which time she had moved to the UK. Ms. El Alti said giving birth for a second time only added to her trauma, as she faced resistance to elements of a birth plan intended to take account of her PTSD, with key parts of the plan being breached or not implemented. When she became pregnant for a third time, she said she knew she wanted a maternal assisted C-section and discussed the option with staff at the NHS Lanarkshire. She continued, "I was delighted when the NHS Lanarkshire team agreed to the maternal assisted option and my other needs and wishes. We had multiple discussions and a full simulation session using a doll, a first for the clinicians. When she was being born, the lead obstetrician brought Aurora's head and shoulders out. Then I completed the birth by grasping her under her arms and lifting her onto me. The team was also marvellous in accommodating a list of my requests, which included no announcement of the baby's gender, lights dimmed after I lifted her, and a quiet moment to speak to Aurora so that my voice was the first one she heard. But I ended up uncontrollably sobbing with joy." She added, "My recovery was very easy compared to the previous C-sections. Aurora and I had no complications and we were able to go home the very next day. Aurora is a healthy and happy 10-month-old who is the light of our world." Trudy Marshall, NHS Lanarkshire Executive Nurse Director, said, "We're immensely proud of her maternity and obstetrics colleagues for the way they stepped out of their comfort zone to offer Layla the opportunity to give birth in the way she wanted and needed. It's a fantastic example of what we strive to provide, care that's person-centred and trauma-informed, and reflects Scotland's health and social care policy of getting it right for everyone." That article was written by Nick Forbes.
The Herald on the 30th of January and the news section. Grievance inquiry into HES boss ongoing after 9 months by Kathleen Nutt. A grievance procedure against the chief executive of the government's troubled heritage agency is still ongoing after it began. The Herald can reveal that one of the complainers has withdrawn from the process, but the 6 directors remained involved. MSPs were given the update that the inquiry was continuing into complaints about Katarina Brown, Chief Executive of Historic Environment Scotland, HES, as they took evidence from Culture Secretary Angus Robinson and Senior Civil Servant Kenneth Hogg on Thursday about the organisation, which has been engulfed in controversies. The Herald revealed in November last year that all 7 directors of HES lodged a collective grievance against Ms Brown on May 8, raising complaints about her management. Ms Brown, who's paid around £145,000 a year, was appointed Chief Executive of HES in September 2024, but went off sick on May 2 and did not return until October. Her absence included a period where she was suspended. Mr Hogg, Director for Culture and External Affairs at the Scottish Government, confirmed to committee members that the grievance procedure was continuing, but he told MSPs, "I'm not sure that it is all 7 anymore." The Herald has since found out that one of the directors has withdrawn from the grievance process. It is understood grievance procedures against senior managers can sometimes take a few months, but it's not clear why the inquiry into Ms Brown is taking longer. In November last year, Ms Brown told the Herald that she was confident her management approach would be vindicated in the investigation. "I'm looking forward to participating in the overdue investigation into the grievance, as I am confident my management approach will be vindicated. As a steward of a publicly funded organisation, my priority remains to uphold and promote the highest standards of behaviour, especially at the senior level," she said. HES is given £74 million a year to look after and promote more than 300. A critical report he did into the organisation, which he published in December. During his appearance, he was critical of the failure by the Scottish Government to appoint an interim chief executive during Ms Brown's absence. He argued the lack of an accountable officer for a sustained period left the organisation without a leader overseeing how public money is spent and leaving the organisation vulnerable to fraud. "I believe that the Scottish Government should have appointed a substitute accountable officer to provide the necessary leadership and accountability," Mr Boyle told MSPs. Ms Robinson appeared to disagree with Mr Boyle's assessment, arguing Ms Brown had wanted to return to work, but the board did not want her to do so, and later refused to say if he has confidence in the board. Chair of the board, Dr. Hugh Hall, stood down in September before the end of his tenure this month, and there is now an ongoing review into the organisation by former Dundee City Council Chief Executive David Martin. Sir Mark Jones was appointed the new chairman at the end of last year and was tasked with getting the body back on track. Under questioning from Scottish Labour MSP Neil Bibby, Mr Robertson said he has a very high degree of trust and respect for Sir Mark Jones, but asked if he has confidence in the rest of the board. He added, "I'm pleased that progress is being made in turning around the situation in historic Environment Scotland. The board is playing its part under new leadership in doing that. So I think under new leadership and following the internal investigations and then reporting, I'm confident that historic Environment Scotland under new leadership will be in a profoundly different place to where it was before. I'm not going to sit here and generalise about the entire board or the entire senior leadership team or indeed the chief executive." Pressed on the issue by Mr Bibby, the Culture Secretary said he has confidence the board is heading in the right direction under the chairmanship of Sir Mark Jones. Pushed again, Mr Robertson said, "I have chosen my words very carefully. I have confidence in the leadership of HES under the chairmanship of Sir Mark Jones. I have already taken the earliest opportunities to strengthen the board to make sure they have board members who have experience that the previous board did not." The Culture Secretary added that he did not want to prejudge investigations ongoing into previous happenings at the body. And that was by Kathleen Nutt. The Herald on the 30th of January and the news section. Lib Dems eye Holyrood seat after Bearsden by-election win, by Andrew Learmonth. Voters in Bearsden have handed the Liberal Democrats a decisive by-election victory after the jailing of a Conservative councillor for romance fraud. Ben Langmead took 1,744 first preference votes, up 15%, with the SNP's Lynn Gibbons on 789 and Reform UK's John Fairley on 709. Labour were on 650, while the Conservatives managed just 283, just 6.2% of the vote, a fall of 17 points on the 2022 council elections. Mr Langmead was elected after 4 rounds of transfers. Liberal Democrat sources believe the emphatic win in Bearsden South puts them in a strong position to take the Strathkelvin and Bearsden constituency at May's election. The constituency is currently held by Rona Mackay, the SNP's chief whip. She is not seeking re-election. At the 2021 election, Mr Paulson was the Tory candidate and came a distant second with 9,580 votes. The Lib Dems were in fourth with 6,675 votes to Ms Mackay's 21,064. But party strategists believe the collapse of the Tory vote, the emergence of reform, and the UK Labour government's unpopularity means they could now be in with a chance. They also won the overlapping Westminster seat at the 2024 election and have a well-oiled ground operation. "We've knocked every door in the patch," said one source. Andrew Paulson was jailed in November after being convicted of a £188,000 romance fraud. The Portmore East Dunbartonshire Council chief and church leader duped his 72-year-old lover into handing him cash in a property scam between May 2021 and March 2022. The court heard he convinced her to transfer money to him under the false pretense that she was investing in 2 homes and a letting firm. However, prosecutors proved that Paulson put his sole name on the title deeds of both properties without telling her and used the woman's money to fund his own lifestyle. He was also found guilty of embezzling £9,018 from Cumbernauld-based Christian radio station Revival FM. Paulson met the women at church and they were intimately in a relationship from 2013 and resumed their relationship during the pandemic. Evidence heard in court revealed that in May 2021, the fraudster persuaded her to pay £40,500 to buy out his ex-wife's share of a house in Bells Hill, Lanarkshire. The women believed they would jointly own half the property and that she would receive half of any rental income. but prosecutors showed Paulson became the sole owner a month later. On 14th January 2022, the complainant transferred £146,000 to purchase a home in Bearsden, Dunbartonshire, which she understood would be solely in her name. However, 6 days later, Paulson registered himself as a sole owner. The woman was also depositing around £200 a month into AA Lettings, a firm they jointly established to cover repairs costs on the two properties. The court further heard that Paulson used Revival Radio's direct debit card to pay for a casino outing and property refurbishments. Around March 2022, the woman saw the bank statement for AA Lettings and suspected she was a victim of fraudulent activity. After examining the accounts, she believed she was funding Paulson's lifestyle, which included paying for weekends away and his mother-in-law's 70th birthday party. Fraser Gibson, Procurer Fiscal for Glasgow and Strathkelvin, said Andrew Paulson exploited the kindness of his former partner to fund his own lifestyle. Romance fraud is a particularly appalling crime, and this has both an emotional and financial impact. Financial crime cases can be complex, but the evidence presented during the trial made the criminal activity clear. Mr. Paulson had co-led the council with Liberal Democrats Vaughan Moody from 2018 until 2022. And that was by Andrew Learmonth. The Herald on the 30th of January and the news sections. Review. No Friend to This House by Natalie Haynes, by Neil Mackay. No Friend to This House by Natalie Haynes, Mantle 20. Some years back I was talking to Natalie Haynes about her latest book on the goddesses of ancient Greece. It was called Divine Might. Haynes, like her subject matter, was in pugnacious and imperious form. She made it clear that she wasn't interested in any book with men in it, by which she meant books by men, about men, and for men. If it's a story about men, she said, it better be as good as Sophocles, because otherwise, honestly, I've probably heard as much about men as I need to for a bit. There's no shortage of them. If men are marking art about men, then it better be great art. That's where my bar is set. Mostly I agreed with Haynes. Men's often middling men of middling talent have dominated literature and the arts and basically everything else on the planet for millennia. Women deserve an equal shot, so let the middling men retreat and the women of talent advance. The arts should be meritocracy regardless of class, gender or race. All that matters is an artist's ability to create and move an audience. For my tastes, the sex war rhetoric Haynes employed was a little Trumpian, in reverse evidently, but the point she made about representation in the arts was fair, even if the tone was rather caustic. Although Haynes studied in the classics, she began her career as a comedian, so a punchy, no-holds-barred style of delivery seemed part and parcel of her persona. Like Haynes, I grew up obsessed with ancient myths. When we talked, I was much taken with the trend in literature for gifted women writers, retelling the stories of ancient Greece from a feminist perspective. Madeline Mendel had retold the story of Circe, putting a feminist slant on the Odysseus myth. Pat Parker used her novel The Silence of the Girls to give voice to the women of the Trojan War, and Haynes had already put women front and centre in the Oedipus myth with her novel The Children of Jocasta. It's worth reconsidering Haynes' thoughts on writing and gender in the light of her latest novel, No Friend to This House, which retells the story of Medea, Jason, and the Argonauts. Jason sets off for Colchis to claim steal would be a better term, the Golden Fleece. He's only successful in his quest thanks to the brains and skill of Medea, Princess of Colchis. Medea has no to flee with Jason thanks to her treachery, however. She is then betrayed and abandoned by Jason. Rejected for another woman, Medea becomes what we would today call a family annihilator. In her jealousy and rage, or so more retellings of the myth claim, she murders her children to spite the man who wronged her. If there ever was a myth which needed feminist retelling, it's this one. Jason is a cruel and narcissistic sociopath. He isn't the good and wise hero of the old 1963 movie. Medea is a metaphor for the horror of being a woman in the ancient world. How many great women were intellectually smothered, driven to madness simply because of their sex, forced to be depended upon and controlled by idiot men, either husbands, fathers, or brothers who were unfit to lace their sandals. However, the problem with the Haynes novel is that it appears after year upon year now of ancient Greek myths being retold from a feminist perspective. Her writing is solid, her storytelling is strong. Haynes does a good job. However, there's a sense that we're at the fag end of a trend which is thoroughly exhausted. I'm absolutely not saying that women writers should stop retelling old stories from a feminist perspective. In fact, more please. What I'm saying is that perhaps the retelling of ancient Greek myths needs a rest for a while. And I make that point as someone who is, I repeat, obsessed with ancient myths. Couldn't we try other myths, Celtic or Native American legends, the epic of Gilgamesh? Now that's a tale I'd love to read, the very first epic poem retold from the point of view of the women of the story. What about Beowulf? The entire works of Shakespeare, Dante, Boccaccio, or Robin Hood through the eyes of Maid Marian. As Haynes made clear, nearly all stories until the 1800s were the preserve of men, and from the 1800s the stories that women could tell were tightly controlled and subject to harsh and unfair standards compared to male writers. So there are centuries of male-dominated stories to be given fresh life by women novelists. Haynes said that if men are making art these days, then it better be good art. Well, the same is true for women. Simply retelling Greek myth after Greek myth becomes subject to the law of diminishing returns. It feels unfair to single Haynes out for criticism on this count. It's her bag after all. She's a classicist, novelist, and feminist. It makes sense that this is her material, but she shares that world with many other writers ploughing the same furrow. Unfortunately, the feminist retelling of ancient Greek myths now feels like a Marvel movie franchise, worn out. Let me balance the scales here, though, and add that if you, unlike me, you have not read any of the many feminist retellings of ancient Greek myths that have been published over recent years, then you'll love Haynes's Tale of Medea. Taken on its own merits and in complete isolation from all other similar works, the book is very good, taken as part of a literary movement. However, it feels well-trodden territory. There could, though, have been much more thorough psychological exploration of Medea. I opened this book hoping to read a gifted feminist writer unravelling why a woman would kill her children. I didn't really get that. Haynes nods to Beloved by the great Toni Morrison and Sophie's Choice by William Styron, a very unmediocre male writer, when it comes to Medea's motivation, asking for the impossible question. Are there any circumstances in which it's right to let your child die or even take your own child's life? What answer Haynes provides is vague. If you wish to explore the theme of mothers and violence, Beloved and Sophie's Choice remain the novels demanding your attention. And that was by Neil Mackay. The Herald on the 30th of January and the news section. Plans for new ferry for Scottish Islands takes steps forward by Jodie Harrison. Plans to build a new ferry to serve Scottish Highlands have taken a step forward. Shetland Islands Council have launched a tendering process seeking bids from companies to build a new ship for its fleet. The 33-metre Class B ro-ro passenger vessel will be a maximum of 500 gross tonnes and are built to meet Maritime and Coast Guard Agency standards, the local authority said. It will be capable of operating on any of the current inter-island ferry routes except to the island of Fula using existing terminals. The ship would also be operated by current crews without the need for additional certification. The move to begin the tendering process comes after council has approved the case for a new ferry in 2025. Companies have a deadline of 2nd of March 2026 to submit bids for the work. Shetland Islands Council said in a statement, Shetland Islands Council has today invited expressions of interest from companies to build a new relief vessel for its fleet of inter-island ferries. The new 33-metre Class B ro-ro passenger vessel will be a maximum of 500 gross tonnes and built to meet Maritime and Coast Guard Agency standards. It will be capable of operating on any of the current inter-island ferry routes except Fula, using existing terminals, and be operated by current crews without the need for additional certification. The local authority added, councillors approved the outlined business case for a new relief ferry on 15 September 2025, following the earlier work of the ferry's resilience review. Companies with an interest in building the vessel are invited to submit the necessary documents for the first stage of the tender process by 2nd March 2026. And that was by Jodie Harrison.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 2nd of February 2026. From the news section, expansion bid by Borders Caravan Park is granted permission. Article written by Paul Kelly. Go-ahead was given today for a major extension of a Borders Caravan Park, despite the applicant recently going into administration. Members of Scottish Border Council's Planning and Building Standards Committee approved on Monday, February the 2nd, an application from Cove Communities for 36 new static caravans on land southwest of Springwood Caravan Park at Springwood Village in Kelso. The new caravans are to be installed in an adjacent farmer's field located beside the existing caravan park. 10 objections to the proposals were submitted, citing such grounds as increased traffic, wildlife concerns, a loss of peace and tranquility for neighbours, and the loss of green space. Cove Communities Holiday Park UK entered administration in November 2025, affecting 11 holiday resorts across England and Scotland. However, members were informed that the current status of the company did not impact on the granting of the application. Lead Planning Officer Barry Fotheringham explained, "The status of the company which is involved at Springwood is not a material planning consideration. It should not form part of your deliberations today. Planning condition goes with the land, not with the applicant, which if you were minded to grant consent with permission would allow the current owners or any other company who may take control of the holiday park following the administration process to implement that consent." Mid-Berwickshire SNP councillor Donald Moffat said, "This is good news for Kelso and the area because these caravan parks do actually contribute greatly to the viability of shops and takeaway businesses. And I know that personally in Greenlaw, which is in my ward, it accounts for a lot of trade in the local mini market, and without the caravan park it would possibly not be viable. I know that since we were fortunate to get a caravan site in Coldstream, it has made a dramatic difference to the co-op and a lot of the takeaway businesses. In fact, there's another one just opened. The employment in that area has gone up as a result of the caravan park." Committee Chair Simon Mountford, who represents the Conservatives in Kelso, said, "Colleagues, thank you for your support for this proposal. As you know, it is in my ward. This will enhance the tourism offering into Kelso. It's a popular and attractive caravan site at the moment, but there is a demand for more caravans, and I think this will meet a demand, and the economic benefit will outweigh any possible impact on residential amenity, which I think will be pretty slight in any case." In his report approving the application, Council Planning Officer Ewan Calvert stated, "This site has historic permission dating from the 1970s. There were 2 extensions in the 1970s, followed by a further 2 extensions in the 1980s. Members will note that objectors call into question the need for the expansion of the caravan park, but the applicant's business plan addresses the number of caravans currently on site, confirming that the present level of 179 caravans is well below the total number permissible under licence, up to 340. Calvert added, "The proposed expansion is considered acceptable in terms of the visual, landscape and environmental impacts. Mitigation and supporting infrastructure can all be secured through appropriately worded planning conditions. This limited impact, aligned with the potential to generate economic growth and inward investment in the borders through the expansion of an existing and well-established tourist facility, is significant in the wider planning balance." That article was written by Paul Kelly and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 2nd of February 2026, from the news section. Opposition grows over proposed solar panel farm near Hoyk. Article written by Paul Kelly. Opposition is growing to a proposed solar farm in Hoyk which would sit right on top of the town. Sturtry's Renewable Energy Park is a proposed renewable energy development comprising ground-mounted solar photovoltaic arrays, a solar farm, and a battery energy storage system, BESS, on land northeast of Hoyt substation. Applicant Eve Vote has submitted a Section 36 consent application to the Scottish Government's Energy Consents Unit. The development would comprise of a 30 megawatt solar farm and an associated 30 megawatt BESS, together with a substation and ancillary infrastructure. The BESS will store and release electricity to the grid, helping to maintain frequency and voltage stability and support the transition to a low-carbon economy. But concern of the impact the development will have on the community has been growing, particularly its visibility from the A7 on a route to the recently approved Centre Parks holiday village. Opponents say it will also be visual on parts of the Border Abbeys Way, a popular tourist route. Concerns also centre on the impact it would have on wildlife, the potential for noise, fire risk and the lack of economic benefits, amid fears to create a precedent for further renewable energy developments in the area. Hoyt Councillor Watson McAteer is among those who has raised a formal objection to the Energy Consents Unit. He said, "I agree that the solar and battery development at Sturches is completely in the wrong location and it shouldn't be agreed. I've sent an objection to the Energy Consents Unit in that respect, not least because its closest point is within 300 metres of Hoyt. The whole site itself is within a mile of the town. It is sitting right on top of the town, which is a ridiculous location. The company says it has carried out extensive consultation with the community, including 2 public meetings. Lead planner for IBVoit UK, Chris Peachy, said, should the proposal be consented, we would expect to start construction by 2027, with an anticipated grid connection the same year. The estimated electricity generated each year by the solar farm will be equal to the annual electricity consumption of 8,600 average UK homes and will be key to meeting the Scottish Government's solar energy ambitions. Mr Peachy says the development will include wildlife habitat creation and tree planting. IBVote will also provide a community benefit fund of £12,000 each year for the project's 40-year lifespan. This article was written by Paul Kelly and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 2nd of February 2026, from the news section. Search underway for the UK's smallest mouse in Scottish Valley, by Josh Pizzuzzo-Pomacco. Volunteers are to mount a search for the UK's smallest rodent in the Taras Valley near Langholm. The Taras Valley Nature Reserve said that woven grass nests, believed to have been made by tiny harvest mice, had been found during a recent volunteer session. The rodents, which weigh between 4 and 6 grams, are listed as a critical species in Scotland. The Nature Reserve says they will hold a series of surveys in February to confirm the presence of the mice in the 10,500 acre valley. Reserve Manager Jenny Barlow told the BBC that the potential discovery was a complete surprise. During a recent volunteer session, we stumbled across some little woven grass nests in some of our tussocky grassland areas, she said. They are usually a telltale sign of harvest mice, as they use the long grass to weave nests to sleep and breed in. Barlow added, "We think we found one hiding away, snuggled in with a tree guard at the end of a tree. It is just something that helps us raise the profile. We're really keen on bringing people to explore and experience nature in Langholm." A Facebook post announcing the search reads, "We're going to be doing some volunteer harvest mice surveys in February to investigate further, to see if we can officially confirm their presence in the Taras Valley. If you'd like to join us, you're more than welcome, and all guidance for doing the survey will be given on the day, and done in groups so everyone can learn more about it. The searches will be held every Wednesday in February. The sessions will run from 10 AM to 12 PM, and we'll be meeting at Laverock Birdhead," the post added. That article was written by Joyce Pusisopomako and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 1st of February 2026. From the opinion section. SNP have given Labour so many open goals. Sarwar missed every one. By Feature Writer of the Year, Kevin McKenna. For a few brief moments following the 2024 UK election, Scottish Labour's 17-year banishment in the wilderness appeared to be at an end. The party had won 37 Scottish seats, an increase of 36, and were set fair for victory in the 2026 Holyrood election. Even when that dawn began quickly to fade, hope was rekindled last year when, against the odds, Davy Russell edged past the SNP to win the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election. That triumph now seems to have been an outlier, achieved more by Mr Russell's stalwart support local appeal than by any sense that the party's old support base had returned to the fold. The real story behind the numbers lay in the performance of Reform UK. This party, lacking an identifiable Scottish leader and little or no electoral infrastructure or strategy, had come within a whisker of taking the seat. Yet Labour remained buoyant. After all, while their numbers had declined slightly, the SNP share of the vote was down by almost 17%. And besides, no one could seriously expect that a party led by the snake oil merchant Nigel Farage would win more than a handful of seats in any Scottish election. Well, they ken now. 3 months out from May's Holyrood election, the latest opinion poll predicts that Reform will beat Labour into third place, and by a healthy margin. If that turns out to be the case, Labour in Scotland will only have themselves to blame. It's been suggested to me that by some party activists that Anas Sarwar has been a victim of circumstances beyond his control. Labour's Scottish leader is a far more impressive performer on the Scottish stage than John Swinney, who bends in the wind of what he perceives to be edgy cultural trends. Scotland's First Minister has lately looked out his wooden machine gun and plastic helmet to get all macho about Ukraine, Venezuela and Gaza. He has suggested deploying Scottish troops in any forthcoming NATO war against Russia, and invited warships to be based in Scotland amid rising global tensions. Can we play it soldiers too? It's pathetic. But the SNP's glove puppets and acolytes all love it, because this is what big, independent, grown-up countries do. It also masks the truth that your government is incapable of building a passenger ferry, and only with great difficulty can connect the Scottish mainland with its own islands lying a few miles offshore. If the SNP were ever entrusted with a role in any future NATO war effort, our sailors wouldn't get past Millport before needing to call in for repairs. It shouldn't have been difficult, then, for Mr Sarwar and the party machine he personally built in Scotland to have won back a significant cohort of the Labour support who had migrated to the SNP. Not only has an independent Scotland become a grand illusion, evaporating in the winds of the SNP's self-indulgent cultural caprices, but the Sturgeon/Swinney-led government has failed in every vital area of public life, at every level, and by every discernible metric. Everything that bears their imprint has failed. If only their deficiencies extended to building boats and making the ferries run on time. The SNP are the Wreck-It Ralphs of Scottish politics. Everything they touch turns to ashes. They, and their malevolent clowns, the Scottish Greens, have laid waste to Scotland's infrastructure and the nation's finances. When your government has to be dragged into the highest court in the land to reveal the truth, after 5 years of trying, about an investigation into the ethics of Nicola Sturgeon, you know you're dealing with a cowboy outfit. This, though, is a government which protects ministers who routinely mislead Parliament and play hide and seek with the ministerial code. The basic test of a government's tenure, especially one that channels progressiveness, is the extent to which they've improved the lives of the country's most disadvantaged communities. In the 19 years they've governed Scotland, the SNP have made their lives worse. Chronic levels. Addiction mortality rates are the worst in Europe. Child poverty and homelessness remain at chronic levels. Hospital waiting times, exemplified by the report earlier this month of a 5-year wait for hip operations, are unacceptable. Their role in the unfolding scandal of 6 infection-linked deaths at Glasgow's flagship Queen Elizabeth University Hospital points to outright callousness towards our most vulnerable people. They continue to endanger the safety of women in prison by admitting violent male offenders now identifying as female. They pretended to promulgate the Supreme Court judgment on sex and gender while clandestinely seeking to oppose it. In any other liberal democracy, they'd be staring defeat at the next election. Yet Scottish Labour have failed to dent their lead and have probably lost their chance. In my travels around working class neighbourhoods across Scotland over the last 5 years, it's become apparent that the people in these communities have lost trust in Scotland's political establishment. They feel loathed by the SNP and haven't heard anything from Labour that suggests they'd be much different. Reform have now begun to fill the wide gap that exists between these communities and Holyrood's petite Liberals and Bearsden Bolsheviks. Scottish Labour should have occupied that territory, and their failure to do so can't all be laid at the feet of Keir Starmer and his spectacular U-turns and social reforms. Anna Sarwar has been the leader in Scotland for 5 years. Prior to that, he was one of the party's chief policy enforcers. During this period, he helped orchestrate a hounding of authentically socialist politicians like Neil Findlay and Monica Lennon, who were menaced for daring to back Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour leadership contest. The party in Scotland was tacking to Keir Starmer's insipid Blairism even before he became Prime Minister. Instead, they should have been on the streets of Larkhall, Broxburn and Shettleston, listening to the heartbeat of their people and observing their marginalisation. If they'd had, then, like me, they might have seen the threat of reform pretending to be the community champions in these places. They chose to back men's and women's prisons, and, like Scotland's fraudulent and affluent trade union leaders, they endorsed the betrayal of working class women in the GRR debates. Scottish Labour simply did not have the presence, charisma or courage to be true representatives of our poorest communities. Consequently, Reform have walked straight in, changed the locks and stolen their clothes. Earlier this week, Davy Russell spoke up at Holyrood against the Scottish Greens' performative bid to outlaw greyhound racing in Scotland, even though there are currently no major greyhound tracks left in the country. You were reminded of the Scottish Parliament's first private members' bill in 1999, when Labour's Mike Watson, whose constituency included Castlemilk, announced he wanted to ban hunting with dogs. No one in his constituency had seen equestrian fools and jodhpurs and riding crops chasing foxes since the Napoleonic Wars. More than a quarter of a century later, Labour in Scotland remain impervious to the rhythms in the communities that they once represented. The SNP have given them a hatful of open goals and they've missed every one, and the reform race baiters have piled in. That was a piece written by Kevin McKenna and read by Ian McKenna, no relation.
From the Herald, Monday, 2nd of February 2026, Sports section. I want to play at the World Cup. Celtic could save my dream. By Mark Walker. Incoming Celtic striker Junior Adamu admitted he has to play every week to save his World Cup dream. The Austrian international is said to be one of the Hoops' late transfer recruits as they attempt to retain their title. Adamu has been capped 9 times by Austria, but he's yet to score for them and recently lost his starting place in Bundesliga side Freiburg's team. And last month the 24-year-old former Red Bull Salzburg hitman admitted how important he viewed regaining his place in the Austrian squad for the World Cup, where they will play Jordan, Argentina and Algeria, having made his last appearance for his country a year ago. He said participating in the World Cup this summer is one of my biggest goals. I want to prove myself so that my performances are also seen in Austria. I'm giving it my all in training so that I can get more playing time and score goals. I've had a few conversations with the coaching staff about my lack of playing time. We agreed that I should just stick with it and give it my all in training. I'll deliver what I can and show the team that I can be a great asset. The coach decides who starts and who doesn't. At Freiburg, I'm not just judged on goals, because it's true that I also do a lot of the work defensively. I'm a player who can be dangerous up front, of course, but also helps out a lot defensively. That means I'm missing a bit up front, but I'm working hard to ensure I have strengths in both areas. We do a lot of pressing from the front, and I help a lot with that. But I admit that recently the goals have been lacking for me, and my aim is to score goals and provide assists and help support the team. That's my position, after all. That article was by Mark Walker. From the Herald, Monday, 2nd of February 2026. Novak Djokovic reflects on Australian Open near miss, by PA News Agency. Novak Djokovic juggled contrasting emotions as he reflected on a tantalising Australian Open near miss. At 38, Djokovic produced one of his great performances to beat two-time defending champion Jannik Sinner in the semi-finals, only to come up short against Carlos Alcaraz in a 2-6, 6-2, 6-3, 7-5 defeat. The chase for a record-breaking 25th Grand Slam title has fueled Djokovic over the last couple of years, but his last major victory remains at the US Open in 2023. He'll be 39 by the time the next slam comes around at the French Open in the spring, and while this tournament was certainly a step forward, the luck he had particularly when quarter-final Lorenzo Musetti pulled out, injured at 2 sets up, cannot be forgotten, and he knows his opportunities are dwindling. I have belief, and I have always confidence and vision to win a slam, another slam, anywhere, to win anywhere where I play, but I did not expect it, said the Serbian. That's different. I lowered my expectations the last couple of years, which also I think allows me to be able to let go of some of that unnecessary additional stress. It's always tension and stress and pressure, and I just don't want to be overwhelmed by it. It also feels good a little bit at not always being the main favourite to win slams. I think that kind of gives you a little bit of extra motivation, I guess, when it comes down to the last rounds of the slam. I managed to beat Jannik, who is double defending champion here and won the last 4 or 5 matches against me in 5 sets. I'm very proud of that. Incredible match, incredible achievement. It's an incredible achievement for me to be able to play finals, be a couple of sets away maybe to win a championship. Of course, after a loss, it's a bitter feeling, but nevertheless, I have to be content with this result. Djokovic finds himself now in the position so many challengers faced against him. Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, when beating one great just meant another one arriving in your path. That trio can scarcely have imagined that a player would come along so soon and not just match their achievements, but surpass them, with Alcaraz the youngest man ever to win the career Grand Slam of all 4 major titles. The results are a testament to this already stellar career, said Djokovic, who had won only a single slam title at the same age as 22-year-old Alcaraz. I can't think of other superlatives about him. He deserves every bit of the praise that he gets from his peers, but also the whole tennis community. He's a very nice young man, good values, nice family. Of course, already a legendary tennis player that made a huge mark in the history books of tennis. With only 22 years of age, it's super impressive, no doubt about it. He's improved physically, mentally, game-wise. He's constantly looking to innovate himself and his game, which is exactly the kind of mentality that needs to be nurtured for a champion. Alcaraz possesses a rare combination of incredible flair and variety, coupled with a ruthless desire to win. He's tied at winning all the Masters Series titles. He already has 6 of the 9, and the ATP Finals as well as the Davis Cup with Spain as targets. While he was asked whether he could achieve the calendar Grand Slam of all 4 majors in a single year. That has not been completed by a man since Rod Laver in 1969, and Alcaraz responded, "It's going to be a big challenge. Those are big words, to be honest. I just want it to be one at a time." Right now, the next one is the French Open. I have great memories in that tournament. I feel really special every time that I go there. So I don't want to put myself in a really pressure position to have to do it. But it's going to be great. That article was by PA News Agency. From the Herald, Sunday, 1st of February 2026, Sports section. Rowe pauses title talk as Rangers boss predicts final day showdown. By Martin McMillan. Danny Rowe insists there should be no William Hill Premiership title race conclusions drawn after Rangers slipped up with a goalless draw at Hibernian. The Jambos' 3-0 win over Dundee United at Tannadice on Saturday night had added pressure to the trip to Leith, but it was the home side who looked more hungry and industrious for large spells, and Rangers goalkeeper Jack Butland helped to keep David Gray's side at bay in the first half with at least 2 terrific saves. Rangers substitute Mikey Moore had the ball in the Hibs net in the 76th minute, but was ruled offside with a point no more than the visitors deserved. The Ibrox side hit 6 points behind Hearts and were leapfrogged by Celtic and goals scored following the Hoops 2-0 home win over Falkirk. Summing up the title race, the Rangers boss, who took over from Russell Martin in October when the club were 13 points behind Hearts, said, "Yeah, Hearts dropped 2 points last week against Celtic. How can I describe it? I think there's 14 games to go. If you asked me 10 weeks ago, we were on the 1st of February in this position, I'd have taken it. We have to be consistent, and this is the next job on Wednesday to take the next points. I'm totally convinced that this race goes until the end. Not until match day 28. It goes until 38. And we have to be there. You always want to win games, but it was exactly the expected tough game today. The opponent with physical intensity. I think it was the game they expected. At the end, I'll take today's point. There are some moments for Hibs when they can score. That's football. We have to carry on. It's about the next game. Hibs went into the game on the back of 2 consecutive defeats, but boss David Gray was slightly frustrated and disappointed after taking only 1 point. I think we certainly had the better opportunities in the game, said Gray, who revealed Scotland's centre-half, Grant Hanley, may have suffered a hamstring problem. I think I'm a bit disappointed, but we've not been a bit more clinical. It's very easy to say goals obviously change games, so if one of those chances go in, the game becomes very different. So slightly frustrated and disappointed that we've not actually won the game. But I think I'm going to think back on the last 2 results and looking for that reaction. I certainly got that from everyone today. Restricted Rangers, they did very little. Goalkeeper had very little to do. Stood up to set pieces. That was something. Rangers are very strong in set pieces. And we went toe-to-toe again against a team that's a good side, that are in a title race for a reason. And we need to build on this and take the confidence from that and be more consistent on our level of performance. And I think that's the big message for myself, for the players today. We can build on this now and make sure we become more consistent. That article was by Martin McMillan.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 2nd of February 2026, from the opinion section. Scottish politicians must do their bit for weary consumers. Article written by David Lonsdale. If you're anything like me, you probably start each new year with a mixture of optimism and trepidation. Optimism for the opportunities ahead, and trepidation for the growing list of challenges on the horizon. 2026 is no exception. The prospects for Scotland's retailers are bolstered by the growth in people's wages continuing to outpace inflation. Falling interest rates should assist. The major sporting spectacles this summer could provide a boon to retailers, notably our qualification for football's World Cup finals in June and Glasgow's hosting of the Commonwealth Games in July. The apprehension, however, comes as consumers continue to remain cautious about spending. Retail sales during the festive period failed to muster much cheer for Scotland's shopkeepers, as lingering concerns over the cost of living and the economy meant shoppers were fewer in number, and those who did venture out took a parsimonious approach towards spending. When people did spend, it was often in response to discounting around Black Friday and Boxing Day sales, showing how sensitive to price and value Scots currently are. That's likely to remain the primary focus for shoppers throughout 2026, given the backdrop of sticky inflation, the weak economy, and geopolitical volatility. It's led people to put more money aside and delivered a near doubling of the savings ratio. Admittedly, this could be unlocked if consumer confidence ticked up. Inflation hasn't gone away. Our shop price barometer showed prices at tills edging up to 1.5% last month, the highest level in 2 years. It was even higher for groceries, a worry for the less affluent who spend proportionately more of their finances on food. Meanwhile, overall consumer price inflation, which includes services, stands at 3.4%. Retailers are doing what they can in a hyper-competitive market to keep prices down for customers. However, there is only so much they can do given spiralling supply chain and statutory costs, often rising faster than revenues, and the squeeze on already wafer-thin profit margins. For example, retail has faced steep rises in energy bills, including for refrigeration costs borne by grocers. But recent government schemes aimed at reducing electricity costs do not include the sector. Meanwhile, statutory labour costs and packaging levies have shot up and have had to be passed on to customers. Astutely, the Scottish budget didn't add new taxes onto retailers. That said, it fell well short of offering stores a business rate discount comparable to that on offer to English counterparts. Against this backdrop, it's little surprise the cost of living is the top public concern heading into May's Holyrood election. Ideally, this will spur a grown-up conversation at the election about the size and scope of the public sector and how it is made fit for the future and more affordable. After all, it's 30 years since councils were restructured, whereas every business has had to change and cut its cloth this decade in response to changing times. More immediately, with Scotland's 32 local authorities about to set their council tax bills, our polling suggests half of Scots back the idea of holding a local referendum whenever a large increase in council tax is proposed. English councils must hold a plebiscite on any proposals for an excessive increase above 5%. Last year's average council tax hike in Scotland was 10% and took a £280 million bite out of households' disposable incomes. Water and sewerage charges will rise 8.7% this April. Whether ideas like local plebiscites pique the interest of policymakers remains to be seen. What is not in doubt is that further increases in taxation levied on households could lessen their propensity to spend and make trading tougher for retailers. Why is that important? Buoyant disposable incomes and confident consumers are critical to the health of the retail industry and the 230,000 Scots who work directly in it. There are few routes to economic growth that don't involve improved levels of consumer spending. Scotland's retailers are keen to play their part in supporting households and bearing down on the cost of living. The next few months will reveal whether political parties want to do the same. David Lonsdale is director of the Scottish Retail Consortium. The article was read to you by Elizabeth.
From Herald, Scotland, 1st of February 2026, from the STEM section of the business section. Sarwar, Labour would ban mobile phones in Scottish classrooms. Article by Jodie Harrison. Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar has vowed to ban mobile phones in classrooms if he is elected First Minister. He said the devices are having a catastrophic impact on young people, with cyberbullying on the rise, and he pledged to instruct teachers and school staff to ban them in class if Labour wins the Holyrood election in May. Mr Sarwar said, "I have listened to teachers, pupils and their parents. The feedback is clear. Schools and classrooms should be spaces for learning, growing and flourishing. However, the reality is that teachers are working in fear and anxiety, with physical attacks on staff having rocketed. Staff are noticing that the attention spans of our pupils is shortening. while cyberbullying is on the rise, with social media meaning pupils are being affected inside and outside of the school day. Mr. Sarwar added, as a result, the mental health of our young people is being undermined with catastrophic results. This has to end. That is why, as First Minister, I will introduce a ban on mobile phones in classrooms for pupils. Under current guidance, teachers are allowed to ban mobile devices, but I would go further by instructing them to do so. We owe it to the next generation to give them the best possible education. A Scottish Labour government is committed to doing exactly that. The Scottish Government released guidance in 2024 that ruled out a blanket ban on mobile phone use in classrooms, but encouraged head teachers to take steps they see fit to limit usage of phones in schools. The guidance says, that means empowering head teachers to take the steps they see fit to limit the use of mobile phones in our schools, up to and including a full ban on the school estate during the school day, if that is their judgment. In November, the City of Edinburgh Council carried out an impact assessment of an all-primary school phone ban. Students at Portobello High School and Queensferry High School have already been issued with wallets to put their phones in during the school day. The wallets require a magnetic pad to unlock them at the end of the day. A Scottish Government spokesman said, the Scottish Government's national guidance on mobile phones makes clear that we support full mobile phone bans in schools, but that we trust Scotland's head teachers, who know their pupils best, to take the steps they deem appropriate for their school context. A number of councils, including Moray and the City of Edinburgh, have introduced full bans in schools, taking active steps in line with the updated guidance. And that article was written by Jodie Harrison. From Herald, Scotland, 31st of January 2026, from the Art and Culture section. Radio Review, How Lauren Laverne Made Kemi Badenoch Sound Vaguely Human. Article by Teddy Jameson. What with the whole Andy Burnham saga at the weekend and Suella Braverman's defection from the Tories to Reform on Monday, you could have been forgiven for overlooking that the leader of Her Majesty's opposition was on Desert Island Discs on Sunday. Interviewed by Lauren Laverne, Kemi Badenoch came across as very Kemi, blunt, she would say honest, committed, not particularly warm, lack of warmth never did Thatcher any harm of course, and convinced the only way is her way. Desert Island Discs is not where you really come to get political headlines. It's where you come to laugh at politicians' taste in music. That said, I think it's fair to say that, unlike other politicians we might think of, Badenoch definitely chose the 8 tracks played. 2 from the musical Hamilton is excessive for a start. There was also a hymn her mum liked, Michael Jackson's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, and even Wet Wet Wet's Love Is All Around, which was her first dance at her wedding. She also chose all 22 Marvel movies as her luxury. Braverman hadn't yet jumped ship when the programme was recorded, but the particularly odious Robert Jenrick had. How was she steady said ship, Laverne asked her. I think the defections are part of the ship being steadied, Badenoch suggested, and while it is sad to lose people who used to be on the team, losing people who were not team players and who were more focused about their own personal ambition rather than the country's ambition is actually helpful for showing what kind of party we are. To be fair, that's probably a good line for the Tories going forward. Vote Conservative, now with 50% less useless tossers. That still leaves 50%, mind. Laverne is never one to probe too deeply as an interviewer, but I think she managed to get something out of Badenoch. For one thing, she helped her sound vaguely human, which has always been something of a problem before. The Tory leader even suggested she was a bit of a wild one in her 20s. I joined the Conservative Party for the party aspect of it, she suggested at one point. The socialising, drinks, hanging out with other young people. It was amazing because that's where I met my husband. It's not quite having it large in Ibiza, is it? Then again, we're talking young Conservatives, so who knows how wild it got. As for her politics, there was a lot of talk about how Britain was multiracial but not multicultural, which didn't make a lot of sense. The gist seemed to be that eating a curry doesn't make us multicultural. Then again, she also seemed to be saying that queuing made us British. Perhaps the most telling moment in the whole show, though, came when Laverne asked her who her favourite superhero was. Doctor Strange, Kami said, because his superpower was time travel, and he had a good cloak. The old-school Marvel fan in me was so busy grumbling about how time travel is not Doctor Strange's key power that I also missed Laverne's follow-up question. If Badenoch could time travel herself, what would she go back and change? Nothing in her own life, Badenoch replied. I would go back and warn other people. Don't do this because this is what is going to happen. Ah, right. So it's other people who need to correct their mistakes, not her. Yeah, that sounds very Kami to me. It was Holocaust Memorial Day on Tuesday, and on 5 Live Breakfast, Rachel Burden spoke to Hedy Argent. Now in her late 90s, Argent offered an articulate warning from history. Born in 1929, she left Austria at the age of 10, but not before she had seen the rise of anti-Semitism and understood its impact. Day-to-day living was very scary. Within the first month of the Anschluss, we lost our home. I was expelled from school. My father's office was taken over by a Nazi lawyer. We were just left wandering around. Understandably, her family wanted to leave Austria. We wanted to get out, but it wasn't a question of getting out. It was a question of getting in. Nobody really wanted all these hordes of Jewish refugees. Fortunately, her family did escape to the UK, but 17 close family members who didn't leave were murdered. When the Holocaust happened, when we heard about it, the world with one voice said, never again, and we have had it again, Argent said in conclusion. We've had it in Darfur, in Bosnia, we've had it now in the Sudan. There are awful things going on, racist things going on. The younger generation has to take over and make sure what happened, the Holocaust, never ever happens again. Just a shout out for Trevor Nelson, who celebrates the 30th anniversary of his debut on BBC Radio next month. His current afternoon show on Radio 2 is a reliable pleasure. And that article was written by Teddy Jameson.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and tell your friends about our service.